Welcome to this session of another expert. We're covering a topic near and dear to my heart, data strategy for PLG. And I have here Francis. He is a co-founder and chief product officer at MadKudu. And I know how important data strategy is to product-led growth. And I forget who said this, but somebody said it to me once. It's like, yeah, that's so true. Like, you can't really be product-led if you're not data-led first. So like really funnels and informs a lot of your strategy for product-led. So Francis is here. Thank you, Francis, for joining us. How are things with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here and excited to see everyone joining in. It was like a couple weeks ago, I was having this conversation with the marketer, and it was funny. Like I think said it in a way that resonated well with me. He was saying that like people often talk about how data is the new gold, and his point was like, well, actually, data isn't really the new gold. It's a gold mine, but like insights are the new gold, and there's actually more and more complexity in extracting gold from the gold mine, and that he was seeing like more and more companies, especially on the go-to-market side, really struggle to extract any insights from the kind of piles of data that are being combined together. And so that's kind of, it's what to some extent led me to start talking more about why I think marketers need to own a data strategy and not just be reliant on other teams to help them extract gold from that mine.
Totally, for sure. I love that. Data is gold now, especially in this product-led world. Like it is directly tied to revenue now. By the way, for people joining us, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ramli John from ProductLed. I'm the director of training here. And Francis, and if people have any questions throughout the session, we're actually going to be very tactical about what we're going to be talking about. If you have questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. And Francis has been gracious enough to answer questions as they come in. So Francis, I'll let you take over.
Yes, perfect. And yeah, as Emily said, please don't be shy, ask questions. I think at the end of the day, like the last thing I want to do is just go over this deck and just like listen to myself speaking. Like ultimately the goal is to share some learnings and some insights from the field, and kind of hear your take on that and how it potentially resonates or doesn't resonate with you folks. So as we mentioned, right, I think the big topic today, and I try to make this sound a bit different, right, is like how, like thinking about having a data strategy as a CMO. And I know like typically we tend to view a data strategy as something that's more, going to be owned on the CIO or CTO side. But as I was mentioning, with kind of like what's been happening over the past 10 years, like we really digitalized the customer journey, which has led us to create, piles and piles of data. And as a marketer, it's critical to be able to, go in and like sift through that data and find insights. And I think PLG is really on the forefront of that, where, you're generating a lot more data typically than your more traditional enterprise sales motions. And so that data can sometimes be crippling. And so maybe one other, I guess like a bit of a statement, this is like a core belief that we have at MadKudu, is that Snowflake is the new CRM. And that actually is, it means a lot in terms of your MarTech stack, your sales tech stack. Like ultimately, Marketo, HubSpot, Salesforce, Eloqua, like none of these tools were designed to handle the volume of PLG, right? Like we see it, like most of our customers, as we're fortunate enough to work with companies like Figma, Miro, Envision, MongoDB, they get like, some of them get like millions of net new users per month. And it's like, if you try to push that into Salesforce, you just like bring it down. Like Salesforce is not gonna, and they're gonna charge you, $1 million per month, and it's not gonna work. And so what we're seeing all these companies do is like all of that data goes into the cloud data warehouse, and they're just pushing more and more data in there. And it has become the central repository for all of the customer data. And I think it's interesting, right? To some extent, I feel that like CDPs are kind of dying. Unfortunately, I think they missed something there, where like the cloud data warehouse is kind of like going to own that space of being the central repository. And so if there's really just one thing that I hope you take out of this session, is this sentence, right? If Snowflake is the new CRM, what does it mean for me as a marketer, as a like go-to-market professional, and what does it mean for my tech stack, and what does it mean in terms like the competence I need to develop to be able to operate in, you know, this new emerging world. And so kind of the typical now like stack that there's a lot more noise around this. Like people call it the modern data stack. I feel like now that's kind of a term that's been coined quite well. And it's really, I think what companies are evolving towards is really this idea that you have this cloud data warehouse or you pipe everything into, then you're going to have a couple tools that enable you to make modifications to it, like a DBT anyway, like there's like some of those technical things. And then you have your production apps that essentially communicate with the modern data stack in different ways. So it could be like the reverse ETL. I think that's like a big trend that we're hearing a lot about. There's like tools like Census, High Touch, where you're basically able to pipe some of that aggregated data from the data warehouse back into production apps. And like the most common use case in PLG is going to be number of active users per domain and like push that to the account object in Salesforce. So you need like an engineer to go and create like a DBT model that computes this aggregation, and then use a tool like Census to take the aggregation and populate the information to Salesforce so your reps can actually then go and look for the accounts with the highest number of active users. And anyway, and then there's like the other way back of like pulling data from you know, your production apps back into the warehouse. And it's actually interesting to see that these two stacks have a very clunky integration still today. I think maybe some of you have noticed, but a few days ago, HubSpot announced their new, how they call it, the enterprise ops platform, something. So basically now there's an option from HubSpot to export your data into Snowflake directly without having to go through a tool like Fivetran. So it's interesting because like HubSpot is starting to become aware of this, and they're starting to realize that they need to own a way to push data into the data warehouse, but they haven't yet started working on how do we get data from the data warehouse back into HubSpot. And it makes sense. And this is where, unfortunately, this is a challenge that you folks are going to encounter, is like HubSpot wants to be the central place for customer data. Like they're going to hold on to that with, you know, dear life, right? Like if they lose that battle, it's really bad for them. And so to some extent, you're going to see in the next few years, like Salesforce, HubSpot, like try to combat this idea that the new CRM is actually Snowflake. But unfortunately, I think that train has already left the station, right? Like companies are adopting this new stack, and it's just cheaper. It's easier to put all the data in a data warehouse and then have like people interact with it. Unfortunately, I would say the big challenge that this also leads to from the perspective of go-to-market teams is that this this stack is really owned by engineers, right? So typically coming in here and, you know, like running stuff in Python or DBT is something that your engineering team will do, but not the go-to-market team. So there is going to be an emergence of tools that actually allow go-to-market teams to interact with the data warehouse. And then probably we're going to start seeing CRMs that plug directly onto the data warehouse. And like that's actually where MadKudu, we position ourselves as being the tools for go-to-market people to interact with the data warehouse so that you can, you know, create segmentation, create different kinds of computations without having to write code. So I don't think we want to live in a future where every single marketer has to be proficient in Python or SQL or whatnot. Like at the end, like marketers should think about, how do I segment my customer base to make sure that I push the right message to the right people at the right time? And the tech stack should enable marketers to do that faster.
Can I ask a question around
Yes.
that? I mean, in terms of like you gave some reasons why HubSpot or like the traditional CRM can't be your CRM, other than the cost. Like what, like, is it just because it wasn't built to, like those CRMs weren't built to handle that much data? And for people who are trying to push back, it's like, why can't I just turn my HubSpot or Salesforce into like a Frankenstein instance essentially, and add more fields to it? Like what would your response be to those people who are just trying to hack together with the current CRM they have?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, yeah, and you hit, I mean, you gave most of the answers, right? Those tools were not built for that scale. If you think even, Salesforce has limitations on the number of fields that you can create, which like we have customers who run into these issues where they've already maxed out the number of fields that they can have in Salesforce. So then it just becomes a disaster where you can't create new fields and you can't do anything. From a purely like compute perspective, anyone who's ever tried to push product usage data, like feed raw product usage data into Salesforce, it just doesn't work. It literally breaks the scale of Salesforce. And it was funny even to see when Segment came out and they were trying to push data into, they had this integration to push data in there. It barely worked for anyone. I mean, they weren't even using it themselves because they knew they would bring their Salesforce instance down if they were trying to push product usage data. So nobody has managed to push data in there. And it's not that people haven't tried. It's just that the tools, like Marketo, HubSpot are just not, even Salesforce are not built for this. And even Marketo was their new Orion project where they actually like revamped their entire backend and built something that was meant to scale further. It's able to manage, millions of users, but it's not able to manage billions of events. So like that's where like they still have this like very like oldish CRM version of things where it's like you have a list of people and it's basically like it's a gigantic database to hold I guess like business cards. But the world is no longer like just business cards. It's like more activity based, and PLG just generates too much activity for those systems to be able to ingest. It's like there's like, even for those of you who are technical, like there's, even from a database perspective, there's the difference between columnar and regular databases. So like old school databases, the idea is that they're super easy to insert and you store like every line is stored together. And then things like Redshift came in where the idea was like, we want to support like a lot of events. And so it's columnar databases where they just like store things differently. So you can have very, very deep tables with lots of events, but they're not very wide. So there's not that many properties. And so you will use one database for like events. So you need it to be very deep. So you can have like many events, but not that many properties. But then if you want like more of your standard kind of like, I need multiple properties for someone, then you want the old school databases that can go very wide, but not very deep. And so the old school CRMs and like marketing stack is meant to be fairly wide, but not very deep. And PLG typically generates very, very deep with like lots of events, lots of different things that are constantly happening. And then you also have all the issues of like streaming data and things happening very quickly and being able to deal with that. So it's mainly that it wasn't built for it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if they try to refactor everything. Unfortunately, I struggle to see how that's going to happen. And it's interesting to see that, Salesforce tried to acquire Snowflake a couple of times and Snowflake said no. And I think, we'll see what the future tells, but I do believe that Snowflake is bound to, like become much bigger than Salesforce.
Makes sense. And what I'm hearing here is like, if people tuning in right now, they really want to marry the product usage data, that event streams, so that they can figure out like their PQLs and all that high value event usage data with their customer data, like in the CRM. It's you people got to move to Snowflake is what I'm really hearing. Like that is like where, Snowflake is, to your point earlier, the new CRM, especially for PLG.
Yeah, I don't think there are many PLG companies out there that don't already have either Snowflake, Redshift, or like BigQuery, like one of those databases. The main thing here is that it's accepting that as a go-to-market professional, you need to have a intimate relationship with that database and not just rely on your CIO and CTO to make sure that data is available. Because then you create a massive reliance on engineering teams that slows you down, because whenever you want to have a new piece of information pushed into the CRM to run a campaign, you have to, put a ticket into engineering. engineering has to stop building the product to start building this pipeline. And that's just not a conversation that's going to go well, after like one or two occurrences. So I think it's almost about, if you accept that this is where the truth is and Snowflake is where the truth is, then you have to start thinking about designing a architecture, a tech architecture that can support that reality and that allows you to actually quickly be able to access that data, manipulate that data, and make it available and accessible for your teams. And that's actually the main thing that we'll be talking about today. And that's why I say that CMOs need a data strategy, because if you don't have a strategy to figure out how to leverage that data, you are going to be shackled to your engineering team, and your engineering team is busy building the product that's like driving this usage. So it just becomes like something that is going to slow down and ultimately kill companies if there isn't strong data ownership on the go-to-market side.
Thank you. Love that. That's like gold mine right there in terms of insight.
And I think, yeah, the kind of the what it means even from an evolution of it's interesting just kind of sometimes to look back at how things change, right? Like we went from the Mad Men era marketers of just brands and like amazing commercials, then the era of like advertising and demand gen, with like everyone starting to figure out like how we can go and like optimize different channels and how we can game the system and like bid the exact right amount in the exact right place. And now I think what really is going to give people a competitive edge is the ability to use data and operationalize data across all these different things. One of the best, I think, or one of my favorite recent marketing campaigns was Segment had these billboards in the Bay Area where it said, they had like the huge headline was like, "Good morning, LA." And the little tagline was like, "What good is bad data?" And it was really funny to show how, you're going to kill your brand if you don't use data the right way to support your demand gen exercise, right? So we are coming to the point where data and your ability to operationalize it can kill anything. It can kill your brand by having stuff that's irrelevant. It will kill your ability to run efficient demand gen campaigns where you just like start spending millions on channels that return low quality leads or just like are not where your customers are. And so really, I think like in these like years to come, like marketers are going to have to become more and more tech savvy and data savvy to be able to fuel all the kind of like, more traditional marketing initiatives. And so it's not one that's replacing the other. It's like all of these actually work in unison. And maybe the last thing of evangelizing before we go maybe into some more, I guess, like tactical elements is one of the big pitfalls that I see with this modern data stack is a lot of folks, compensate for lack of strategy with abundance of technology. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, we have this problem. Let's just like buy some tech to put it on. And it works to some extent. It's like saying, okay, well, let's just like try to pipe some like event data into Salesforce and, let's hope that it'll work. And let's just buy Census and like push some stuff in there and let's see what happens. And that I think is going to become harder and harder. And it's going to break more and more frequently, because if you don't have a clear strategy on what is the capabilities that you need to have as a team, right? If you think of kind of the three pillars of team management is always like people, process, and technology, or like products. You want to use 3 Ps. And it's about what are the people that we need to give us the capabilities that we have to support our go-to-market motions, and how do we make sure we have like a clear process and a holistic customer journey in mind when we actually bring in technology. And one of the things that we keep on seeing is like there's a bunch of vendors, like there's going to be an ABM vendor, and then you're going to have, oh, we are the CRM for your product-led leads, but then you still have Salesforce that is your CRM for your kind of like sales-driven leads. And then you have, oh, you can use Autopilot for your onboarding emails, but you use Marketo for your marketing emails. And you kind of end up with this, people call it the Frankenstack like your Frankenstein stack. And it just becomes unmanageable and everything starts breaking. And ultimately it leads to a terrible user experience because from a brand perspective, you start receiving like 5 different emails from the same company that are telling like slightly different things, but kind of the same. And that again is like, because we are coming into this era where marketers need to have like a clear data and tech strategy, almost like thinking of it to some extent, almost as a CIO or CTO, to make sure you don't have like a huge amount of redundancy and duplicates in your stack. Otherwise, it's ultimately going to slow you down. Cool. So now for, I guess like maybe like more tactically, when we were talking about like a lot of the like different stacks and things like that, this is kind of looking at what we see the most frequently in PLG companies. There's really kind of 4 funnels, right? So and people can flow from one funnel to another, but ultimately you typically have different motions to bring someone to become a customer. And so the self-serve is typically like kind of a no-touch motion where people end up swiping their credit cards. Like it's ideal for your kind of like prosumer or like really small like VSMB style conversions, and that's really where you have like the biggest amounts of volume in terms of users and on fairly low value per conversion. That data typically is the most prone to sit into your data warehouse because it's not something where you want to deploy sales teams. And yeah, so it lives there, and there's like your typical funnel is like people sign up for the product, they become like PQLs or whatever you want to call it. Like they have a high enough level of engagement and you start sending them emails saying, hey, like here's a paywall, or here's why you should upgrade to our premium tier because you could get like this and that feature. And then at the end you get dollars. That's like one funnel. And then you have the like more sales assist, which I think is where most of the PLG companies typically sit from a pipeline generation perspective. And that's funneling product users into Salesforce once they hit a given threshold of usage, or they're like a business email, or they match like, some other criteria. And then you have your sales team reach out to them and try and close a deal. This is like, I think it's probably in part the preferred way of operating today because it's the closest to traditional inbound sales motions where you have leads that become MQLs, you pass them on to sales once they're hot enough, and sales figures out how to actually close deals from them. And now instead of having marketing activities and looking at like webinar activity or like content downloads, you're looking at actual product usage. So that typically lives in Salesforce. Then the next one, which I think is one that carries the most potential for companies out there, is that kind of like bottom up land and expand style motion, where the idea is to realize that having one person from, let's say, Facebook that's super active in your product does not mean that Facebook is ready to become an enterprise customer or ready to buy your product. Or you need to have more usage within the organization. You want to have like 5, maybe 10 people from Facebook who are using your product to, declare that like Facebook as an account is actually ready to engage into a commercial conversation to become a paying customer. And so a lot of companies start figuring this out, and they kind of hack something together, which goes back to what Ramli was saying, like how do people do this today? And like one of the things that you do is you ask a data analyst, hey, can you put together like a simple report that just shows by domain number of active users in the last 30 days? And you have that report, and that's gold, right? Because like your reps are going to love this initially. Like, oh my God, this is showing that, like whatever, like Google has like 7 active users in my application. Great. I'm going to go talk to them. You close a couple of deals and it works well, but then you start realizing, well, actually, how do we now operationalize this? And that's where it starts becoming a disaster, because that data lives in a report in Looker, which is not tied to who owns the account in Salesforce. It's not even tied to the fact that maybe that active account is already an existing customer. So now sales is unhappy, CS is unhappy because a sales rep reached out to one of their customers, telling them about an enterprise plan, which kind of screwed up the relationship. And again, from a brand perspective, if we go back to that, right, like you're hurting your brand by not having, the data infrastructure to support a frictionless customer journey and not having like 5 people pushing different messages. And then the last one, which again, we see companies kind of engage in it. And I think it's for a lot of folks who like might have a more traditional kind of enterprise sales funnel, is really like that more top down, like ABM style funnel, where you find a list of target accounts, and then you're essentially trying to generate activity within these accounts to ultimately drive conversions. I think the interesting part is very often people don't realize how, while we're representing these funnels as like separate, they actually like flow into one another, right? Like the idea of finding target accounts and like trying to go after them should be to then generate product users, which can become PQLs. And the idea that the PQL shouldn't necessarily only lead to an opportunity. It could lead to actually inviting more people, which would then lead to an active account, which would then lead to ideally an enterprise conversion. And this is like one of the things where I think people struggle the most, is figuring out, how do we design, like, we know we have these funnels from an operational standpoint, and that's like it's a you problem. It's like, as a company, we have these funnels. And now the question becomes, well, how do we design a journey for the customer through these different funnels that is actually going to be enjoyable and matches how they want to adopt our product? And that's where you start seeing that it's incredibly hard, because all of these things sit in different platforms and in different areas. And so it becomes unruly and very hard to maintain. And that's why it's so critical that you spend time thinking about, like, at a high level, what is the journey we want to have? How does that journey fit in these different funnels? And how do we instrument it across our different products, or which products do we bring in to make sure there's like a journey that can be orchestrated to provide that kind of like frictionless and delightful experience for your customers?
And you're saying that you're saying that this tools, is there a way to like get them to talk to each other, or like there isn't really, like maybe through Segment or something like that, where especially if a company is using all of these 4 funnels, like what are like ways so that they don't, I guess, collide, is what I'm saying. Like, even if like you have that self-serve and you have this sales assistant, even bottom up, like what are, like, do you have any tips around that, so that there's kind of like this connection between the different funnels?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no easy answer on that one, other than architecting it, right? And this is why I'm saying that that's like the core of the data strategy, is actually spending time understanding like how we want to make sure these different data flows connect, and saying, for example, if we start saying, okay, like we got some initial success from this Looker report that led us to find accounts that are engaged, and we saw that we were able to sell to them, but now we're starting to run into issues of, oh, but these are existing accounts, or we have the wrong, like a rep that doesn't own the account, reach out to them. You can then like design. So basically it's like experiment design, where you're saying, okay, so if we try this bottom up, way of approaching deals, like, does it work? Okay, low scale, it works, great. So now what is the next way we want to do this? So it could be like, a reverse ETL solution of saying, well, let's actually start pushing the number of active users as a field into Salesforce, so that now the accounts have that, and we can build a report in Salesforce for people to go after those. And at some point you're going to realize, oh, well, we probably need something more sophisticated. And then it becomes, well, let's actually go out there and look for tools that help us solve that problem. But I think it's really about figuring out, do we have a viable path for people to become customers? How do we validate the hypothesis that it works? And then how do we make sure that our team has the capabilities to support that? And that could be by bringing external tech. It could be by building something internally, or bringing on someone in the team that can actually do that. So it's not a straight or direct answer. Like, I mean, yes, I could say like MadKudu solves part of this, and that's like what we want to do, but ultimately there's multiple ways of going about it. But it's really about making sure that you align your team's capabilities with what the journey that you're trying to orchestrate. Because yeah, most companies will have some shape or form of all of these funnels. And it then becomes a matter of like, as a strategy, do we think we can grow the pipeline contribution of the bottom up funnel from like 5% to 70%? And if we want to do that, we have to scale our capabilities around it because we know there's a ton of potential, and we have to go and invest time and energy in designing a marketing tech stack that is going to help us support this. So yeah, there's like grunt work and like design work that has to be put into this to make it work.
Thank you. And we just have some comments from Enrique and Denisha that this is very helpful. Like you just like even for me, like this is the first time like I've seen, yeah, this makes sense. Like this is like how the 4 different flows really flows through.
Yeah.
We have a question from Chris actually around that small tests you were talking about, like experiments that you see. What kind of small tests are you seeing PLG companies are using to validate the bottoms up motion? Is a question.
Yeah, that's I think the one about looking at like building a report that looks at active users within specific accounts, or like just grouping it by domain, like having a data analyst run that report, and then like sending some of those accounts to sales is a great way to do it. So you can do very, very low key, which is like just have that report and then have reps go through the report and pick accounts they want to go after. If you want to do this in a slightly easier way for the sales team, I've seen teams put together that report and then actually load like do basically a CSV upload into Salesforce to update the field for the number of active users. That could be done like weekly or monthly or whatever. And then from that, actually routing accounts to specific reps, and then having those reps basically say, hey, like this month, these are the 20 accounts that you have to go generate pipeline from, and they're part of the most active accounts in our platform. So it's like very similar. It's almost like taking a page from the, I guess like the ABM, like top-down playbook of saying like, here's your list of target accounts, go generate opportunities within them. But you're saying the way you define the target account list is looking at aggregated product activity to define that list of accounts. And then you can actually start comparing like, what is our pipeline generation ratio to some extent on these like PQAs versus the target accounts. Typically you crush it on generating pipeline from the PLG rather than just like the ABM. And then the funny thing is then from that, like reps want more. And that's like the perfect kind of setup where then reps want to get more and more from the, more leads or more accounts that are active in the product, which is like the virtuous cycle that you want to look for. And that's one of the risks with, I would say, with the sales assist motion, and where I see a lot of companies struggle and sometimes fail, is in promoting leads to a PQL status at companies that don't fit into a transactional sales model. So that's another thing that I didn't necessarily mention too much, but different types of customers will have an affinity that will be stronger to one funnel than another, right? Let's say you're selling to like a bank, right? If you want to go sell to HSBC, no touch is probably not the way to go, right? Like at the end of the day, I don't think a bank is going to come in and like start connecting their data, their systems, and start using the product. And then there's going to have like 5 branches of HSBC that are going to be like pushing data into your product, like getting value. And somehow that's going to make it up to a VP who's going to buy the tool. So when you're selling it to like very, very highly regulated industries, the top down, like ABM outbound still makes a lot of sense because that's how they're used to buying, and trying to force them down a product-led funnel isn't necessarily the right way to do it. Now, if you're selling to, like VSMB, or let's say even SMB, like tech founders, then, no touch is generally a good thing because like they have the user has the buying power. They're willing to spend. So like, that's a great fit for them. And then when we look at like the more nuance between like transactional and bottom up, that's what I was talking about, like not necessarily highly regulated, but big enough companies like Facebook, right? like as I said, one person super active at Facebook, if you send that lead to a rep, it's not going to go well, right? The reps are like quickly going to be tired of like having like super excited about like, oh my God, I got this lead from Facebook. And then the next day I got an awesome lead from Oracle. But those people, like if it's just one person using the product, they have no buying power. Yes, they might be willing to talk to you, but they'll tell you, yeah, no, I'm happy with the setup that we have. I don't think we're ready to talk enterprise. And that's one of the things where you can lose a lot of momentum and a lot of trust in your product-led motion when you do that, because then the sales team is going to be, you know what, like this product-led thing, I don't think it's going to work. Let's just go back to like talking to webinar leads. And like, I want to keep on doing outbound to like VPs and director level, because at least I'm talking to someone who has buying power. So not necessarily like an experiment that, to answer the question, that works, but maybe something to be a little bit careful with, of not like when you're promoting leads to PQLs and pushing them to the sales team, being careful about not necessarily doing that too frequently on like enterprise style companies that will require to be warmed up further on the product side to become an engaged account before actually surfacing them to sales, or being very explicit with the sales team that they are part of the initiative to get the account ready to buy.
Makes sense. Like your customer type dictates which funnel they have. To your point, they have an affinity to which funnel they'll go towards. Which brings up a question that we have in the chat. Harlan asked around, especially the first three funnels, does it matter if it's free trial, freemium, or any kind of product-led model, or like opt-in free trial? Like those three funnels still would probably exist, like independent of the product model, would you say? Or like, self-serve freemium would probably stick more with self-serve, or what would you say the relationship is with these funnels to the product-led model that somebody chooses or the company chooses?
It's a great question. I think the first three work well in any setup, freemium or time-based or whatever, like however you do your trial, time-based or like usage-based. The freemium can work, can help better on the land and expand. However, one of the big challenges that I see with companies doing freemium, and we actually like I did a couple like talks on this, and that you can find easily. Like I think anyway at SaaS Talk in 2019, I think it was like it was like enterprise and freemium, I think was the name of the talk. But the like freemium tends to set a fairly low ceiling for your enterprise pricing, right? Because in freemium, you typically are going to have like some kind of pricing per seat, or like there's like some scale, like a unit price that has to be low enough that you can get these like self-serve people to convert, and that the price like slowly scales to the point where you can have a land and expand. But very often companies struggle to make the unit economics work of having enterprise sales reps having to sell like a $10,000 deal to HSBC, right? Like it often caps. So I think there's a challenge there on the kind of like almost like product and strategy perspective of making sure that if you are going down a freemium route, you need to have an enterprise plan that actually breaks that low freemium ceiling and allows you to go after bigger accounts from an ACV perspective. And that's where typically what a lot of companies will do is they'll say, oh, well, if you need like SAML or any kind of like specific type of authentication, if you need specific like admin features, then you have to be on the enterprise plan, and the price per seat is drastically different, or it's even no longer a price per seat. It's a complete different plan. So I think, yes, it helps to have freemium, but you need to make sure that then you have a like pricing strategy design that allows you to have a high enough price point that warrants or justifies enterprise sales reps. Because it is still like enterprise selling. You still have to, pitch to security. You have to pitch to probably at least one C-level and probably multiple VPs. So it has to be worth the cost.
That makes sense. And I guess a related question to that is like, which, in that scenario where like you do have the enterprise plan, and this kind of related to Enrique's question in the chat around like you have this a licensing company that offers a 30-day trial and they sell retail seats, like probably sales assisted and bottom up would be a good funnel architecture in that sense, is what you're suggesting.
Probably. I think again, like on the line, I think it also depends on how you expect your product to be used, right? So if you have a product that is meant to be used by multiple people, then within the organization, then looking at the active account model is really a good thing. And it's almost then you start designing, and this is where it goes back, like all of this is really about like the data, and all this stuff is just there to support like your strategy and like how you create the customer journey, right? So ultimately, if the goal is to have multiple people within an account, then you want to make sure that your trial experiences, rather than, and this is what I was mentioning in terms of like one funnel feeding into the other, right? When someone hits the PQL stage, rather than trying to get them to convert on a one-seat account, you might want to push them towards inviting more people, and potentially even extending the length of the trial if they invite more people, so that now you're actually starting a kind of like expand motion where you're actually like growing penetration within the account, which enhances and increases your probability of closing them, rather than like being maybe too, I guess, like having too myopic of a view on like this initial conversion and trying to push too hard on getting dollars from that one PQL. So this is where, yeah, again, it's like trying to figure out like what is the best way for your potential customers to experience the product, reduce the risk that they're taking in making the purchase of your product, and how you maximize the likelihood of conversion rate. Because ultimately, like the whole point of having a trial and having a freemium is you're helping customers de-risk the purchase decision of bringing on your technology in their stack. And so if that is like one person alone can de-risk because that's how they're going to be using the product, fine, let's go like transactional. If the goal is to have multiple people use it, then it makes a lot of sense to help them de-risk by showing like how it will work with the entire organization. And maybe the last thing, and this again, like so much of this is really about like taking the time to, you know, draw out what you think the customer journey should be is, so we talked about like different companies might have different affinities to different funnels, but then you also have different individuals will have different affinities to the funnels, right? So when you have, I don't know, let's say like a C level from, let's say, SMB and up, let's say more than 50 people in the company. So a C level signs up for the product. Most likely, the journey that will make sense for them is to invite more people, or to start seeing how their teams can get value from their product. And you don't necessarily want to talk about the features that the day-to-day user is going to get from the tool. And that's really important to think about, like in your onboarding and how you drive someone from sign up to actually getting value. Understanding what is it that this person is trying to de-risk and what information you're trying to get is critical, right? Making sure that you don't talk about like advanced features to someone who really cares about how this is going to help their team, but is not going to be a core user. And for a core user, making sure that they understand why your product is 10 times better than the competition out there, because you offer this specific like advanced feature that is super cool to them, and not necessarily talk about like how it's going to help like the rest of the team. So like figuring these things out are really critical, and like having them on paper and then determining, okay, like if this is the journey that we want to enable, how do we make sure we have the capabilities to do so? And maybe I'll switch to the last slide, which I think relates to this, and I'll leave it on here. Like, and I'm happy we can address questions, but I think now thinking about these different funnels, I kind of think about like evaluating data actionability, and the idea is that you want to go like more and more granular. And we talked about like there's like the high level experience, right? So we were talking for bottom up, right? Like finding out accounts that have like 2, 5, 10 active users, said like that's level 0, right? That's how you run the initial experience of saying, let's see if there's any value we can extract from this. If that becomes successful, then typically you might want to go a little bit deeper and say, okay, like, well, even within the active usage, like we might have like a bunch of people where there's like 10 plus users. But what are the relevant activities in there? And like, are there specific activities that are very clear triggers that someone has gotten value to the point where they're ready, to buy our enterprise plan? For example, did they go check in like the admin pages? Did they go check like if you support SAML authentication? Did they look for a SOC 2 compliance page? Did they look at privacy, how to delete users? Like all these things like tell you, okay, this is a good fit in terms of usage for my enterprise plan. And now you go kind of beyond just the number of active users and into what are those users doing, and are they signaling potential intent for the enterprise or like whatever higher tier you have. And then the next step from that is saying, okay, now we've done this, and the challenge that people typically run into, great, I have this account, there's like 25 people that are active in the account, I'm a sales rep, super happy, my marketing and product team are doing awesome, they're generating active accounts. As a sales rep, I log into Salesforce, who do I talk to? Like, it's great that I have an active account, but who do I email? Like, who do I call? Like, that is sometimes one of the things that we tend to forget as marketers, is that reps still have to pick someone out and actually go talk to them, know what to talk about. And going, through the exercise of figuring out how you would do it can lead you to realize that you might be missing data or missing some level of segmentation to figure out, okay, there's like different people within an account that I might want to talk to. There might be the champion, like the most active user, like the person who I know is like a big fan of my product. I can talk to that person to then like penetrate the account or get more insights as to what is the buying committee, what is the procurement process. And that person can be an advocate, but might not be the decision maker. And then there's the question of identifying who the admin potentially is. Like, who is this person who went to like change the name of the account, change the icon, add users, remove users, look for all the security stuff? That person is the most likely person to care about the enterprise plan, because they care about like being the admin of the account. They don't necessarily care about like usage and the features. Like, they don't know what the features are. Like, there's someone else using it, but they care about being able to admin and make sure that if someone leaves the company, they can remove that person from your account so that they don't have access to that data anymore. And that person, typically for a sales rep, is the best person to go after, because they are going to be receptive to a message about, hey, you have 20 active users, you should use our enterprise account, because that will give you user admin features so that you can control all of this. And so, are you able to give that data to your sales reps? Like, how would you do that? That's kind of like the exercise of figuring out, okay, this is what we want to do. Is our data, like, do we have the data? And then once we have the data, is it made actionable and operational in allowing us to, do this? And that's the part where I was talking about, like, the strategy of saying, like, these are the things we want to do. Now let's go evaluate our data actionability. And do we have the capabilities of running these different campaigns and enabling these different go-to-market motions? So kind of like putting together this roadmap and starting to see what you can do today, what you want to do tomorrow, is really important in driving the roadmap on this like data strategy. So maybe I'll stop there if there are questions. I see stuff in the chat, but yeah, like there's a lot on this slide. And like, I would say, like, the main thing is for your core, like the funnel that has the highest contribution to pipeline, I would typically say you want to get as close as possible to level 3. And then you want to have 2 other funnels that are at least at level 2 and soon to go level 3. That's kind of like typically where you want to be. And it's fine to have one of those that stays at level 1, because, like, again, like, you can't do everything all the time.
I love that hack. That was the first time I've heard it. Like, you find out which user is the one going to the account side and not using any of the features, and just like, okay, this is probably the account admin for that. Are there other ways to like figure out who the account admin is? Like, I guess like whether like it's marrying using like Clearbit or something just to figure out, or something else to really figure out like who is the account admin out of this like 10-20 users.
The job title is typically like a good gives you a good guessing point. I think where, again, it becomes really tricky in in companies that have a very wide array of product users. And this is why, like, and this is, you know, like the interesting stuff of working with companies like Miro or Figma, Lucidchart, like entire companies use their product. And so like the admin could be someone from the IT team, as you know, it could be someone from the marketing team if only marketing is using it, and it's like a director, or like it's someone who's in charge of figuring out what's the right tool to use. And so very often job titles can be helpful. The other thing is stuff like Clearbit is awesome at firmware graphics. Like we know that generally like titles are something that enrichment vendors out there kind of struggle with, and it's like they will give you some insights. So I'd say like that's a good starting point, but we found the most success in actually looking at activities, because also from a rep perspective, it's very tangible and it's easy to understand. Oh, like this person has done this, then I understand why I would go to them, right? Explaining, oh, this person is like a director of IT, and they'll be, why am I not talking to the VP? Or why am I not talking to like someone else in the IT organization? So at least it makes it a little bit more tangible and reduces the scope quite a bit.
Makes a ton of sense. I mean, for people, if you have any questions, feel free to ask it now. We have some time to do some Q&A with Francis. And thank you so much for sharing. I think this, when I saw this slide, I was like, wow, this makes a ton of sense. I think you're leveling up, like starting from level 1 and going all the way to level 3 and trying to figure out exactly what people need to do to move up in terms of data actionability there.
Yep. Yeah, and it is, I mean, it always, I mean, the main thing is, even though like we talked a lot about data and a lot about strategy, and I know the topic of today was like, you know, beyond the buzz and AI. And interestingly, right, you realize like we haven't spoken about AI today, but all of this to some extent is some form of AI, right? So like we're gonna say, hey, like look at admin activities. So like someone classifies your different events, and then you do a count of these like admin events and you just sort by that. That's like the first step in like building some like a system that has some intelligence, even though you're the one feeding it the intelligence and you're automating it. And to me, like sometimes we try to look too much at AI as a silver bullet that can go and like identify all of this, but it very often blurs a lot of lines. It like becomes a bit of a black box in the decision making, when at the end of the day, like for you to drive adoption from the sales team, just telling them like, hey, there's a bunch of admin activities. This is the list that we've identified based on our knowledge of the product. People who do this like over index here, go talk to them. That's going to lead to the, you know, highest adoption on the go-to-market side, and then you can look at building something more sophisticated. So I think it's, again, like AI is just like one element of it's like one tool that you can use. And really the question becomes, when are you at the point where you need AI to scale beyond kind of like the if-then decisions that you've created in the past, where there's just too many branches to the if-then for you to be able to manage that. And that's when AI or some kind of machine learning can become really interesting.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's to Florence's
I was gonna ask
question. That's exactly that, right? It's saying start with if then, which is really what we're saying here, right? Like the identify accounts that have 2 or 5 active users, you're doing an if then. If number of active users more than 20, then consider it to be a PQA. Once that, you know, is like working well enough, you're gonna say, okay, like if they have more than that, or if they have 2 users, but they have done these other activities, then also make them a PQA. And then you start realizing, okay, like now we have more than like 2 if then branches. Oh, it's starting to get unmanageable. Let's actually now have something that goes into like more substantial AI.
Thank you for sharing that. As we're starting to wrap up and hitting our hour, if people have more questions after this, like, oh, I should have asked Francis that question, where's the best place to find you online or anywhere else? Like, and
I would say LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. I try to be as responsive and active as possible. But yeah, that would be the best place. Either reach out to me directly, or yeah, or I think, or if you see one of my posts, like just like ask a question there. I'm always happy to talk shop and to see what people are doing, because like, and none of this, like, you know, I didn't invent any of this. Like all of this comes from talking to like the smart people who are actually doing the work. And yeah, so always happy to hear what you folks are doing, or hear what are challenges, opportunities that you see, and how we could like brainstorm to find a solution and apply some of the learnings from some of the other industry leaders that we've interacted with.
Awesome. And then as well, to find out more about MadKudu, they can find out, and Chris just asked us, madkudu.com, right? Or is there
Yes.
anywhere else I could go? All right.
MadKudu.com, and yeah, that's the best place if like direct interest in MadKudu. We also run a bunch of, so we have a weekly webinar that actually runs on Thursdays, where we do marketing ops confessions, where we talk a lot about these different topics. We go very deep into how to run the operations in marketing to support a lot of these questions. And so like last week we had the awesome MOPS team from Lucidchart tell us how they're addressing some of these problems. So that's like a good place also to learn more about our thought process and how we're getting information from yeah, customers and I mean just awesome professionals out there.
Awesome, Francis. Thank you so much. We have the link from Laura here. Denisha just says, thanks, Francis, so much. So many great takeaways. I appreciate your time. For everybody else, thank you for showing up. Francis, thank you for spending an hour here. Really do appreciate it. For all out there, Francis, have a great rest of your morning, I believe, or for everybody else, afternoon, evening, or wherever you're calling from. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.